In the western desert of Iraq, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest city, in a landscape so empty that satellites struggle to find anything worth photographing, Israel built a secret military base. Nobody asked for permission. Nobody informed the Iraqi government. Nobody sought approval from the United Nations or any international body. Israel simply chose a dry lake bed in one of the most remote corners of the Middle East, flew in equipment under cover of darkness, established a temporary runway, positioned its forces, and waited. When a local shepherd accidentally wandered too close and reported what he saw, Israeli forces launched an airstrike that killed an Iraqi soldier. That soldier's death was the price of secrecy, and that is exactly where this story begins. To understand how this happened, you first need to understand the geometry of the problem Israel was trying to solve. Iran sits roughly 1,600 kilometers from Israel's eastern border. Israeli fighter jets, even the most advanced F-35I Adir aircraft in the Air Force inventory, have a maximum combat radius that makes a direct round trip to Iran's deepest targets extremely difficult without aerial refueling. Every kilometer matters when you are planning precision strikes on hardened underground facilities defended by one of the most sophisticated air defense networks in the Middle East. The western desert of Iraq solved that geometry problem in a single stroke. From that location, the distance to Iran's most critical nuclear sites drops by hundreds of kilometers. Flight time decreases sharply. Fuel requirements shrink. The window for a successful strike run and a safe return to friendly airspace widens dramatically. And the Iraqi government, which maintains deep ties with Tehran and would never have consented to Israeli forces on its soil, was simply left out of the conversation entirely. The planning began well before February 28, 2026, the day the United States and Israel launched their coordinated air campaign against Iran. Intelligence gathered in late 2024 revealed that Israel had already established its first covert base in Iraqi territory, using it to support the June 2025 attack on Iran, known as the 12-Day War. That base was built in late 2024, positioned, used, and quietly abandoned. When Israeli planners began preparing for the far larger 2026 campaign, they returned to the same concept without hesitation. The western desert of Iraq was simply too valuable a piece of operational real estate to leave unused. And so, in the weeks before the strikes began, Israeli logistics teams returned to Iraq and constructed a second installation designed to support sustained air operations and to serve as a forward hub for search and rescue teams ready to recover any pilots shot down over Iranian airspace. The physical details of the base reveal exactly how seriously Israel prepared this operation. According to satellite imagery analyzed by independent researchers after the Wall Street Journal first broke the story, the base included a temporary airstrip carved into a dry lake bed approximately 1.6 kilometers long, located roughly 180 kilometers southwest of the city of Karbala. That length is sufficient to accommodate military transport aircraft. Equipment was flown in during periods of minimal satellite coverage. Special forces were pre-positioned well before the first strike. Search and rescue teams were staged and ready before a single Israeli aircraft crossed into Iranian airspace. This was not a last-minute improvisation. It was a meticulously planned, deliberately concealed, forward military installation built on the sovereign territory of a nation that had no knowledge of its existence. Then came the shepherd. A local man working in the western desert observed what he described as unusual military activity, including helicopters and unfamiliar heavy equipment, in an area with no legitimate reason for any military presence. He reported what he had seen to the Iraqi authorities nearest to him. Iraqi military units were dispatched immediately to investigate. At that moment, the concealment of the entire operation was directly and critically threatened. What happened next is the detail that fundamentally transforms the legal and moral character of this entire story. Israeli forces, having detected the approaching Iraqi military patrol through their surveillance systems, launched airstrikes against those Iraqi units before they could reach the base. One Iraqi soldier was killed in the strike. Baghdad announced his death and initially attributed the attack, incorrectly, to American forces. The United States, confirmed by both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times through multiple independent sources, had no involvement in that strike. Israel had attacked an Iraqi military unit on Iraqi soil to protect a secret base that had no legal right to exist there under any framework of international law. Iraq's official reaction when the truth became public was sharp and immediate. Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani summoned foreign ambassadors for urgent consultations. Senior officials described the airstrike as a reckless act of aggression against a sovereign state. The Iraqi parliament convened to demand a formal investigation into how foreign forces had been operating on their territory without any knowledge or consent from any Iraqi institution. But by the time the full picture became public, the strikes on Iran were already advanced, the base had already served its purpose, and the geopolitical reality on the ground had made meaningful accountability essentially impossible. No government anywhere was prepared to impose consequences on Israel for building a forward base in Iraq at the exact moment the United States and Israel were conducting a massive military campaign against Iran. In practice, accountability was a word that appeared in press releases and parliamentary motions, and absolutely nowhere else. The legal framework surrounding what Israel did represents something genuinely unprecedented in recent military history. Under international law, state sovereignty and territorial integrity form the absolute foundational bedrock of the rules-based international order that every Western government claims to champion. No state has the legal right to establish military installations on another sovereign nation's territory without that nation's explicit consent. Iraq did not consent. Iraq was not informed through any diplomatic channel. An Iraqi soldier died defending his country's sovereignty from a military operation his own government had no knowledge of. Every principle of international law that Western capitals invoke when Russia violates Ukrainian sovereignty was violated here, quietly and without apology, by a close American ally operating with at least the passive awareness of senior American officials. The United States' connection to this operation is the element that has received the least public scrutiny in Western media, and that silence is itself revealing. Multiple sources confirmed to both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times that American officials were aware of at least one of the Israeli bases in Iraq. Aware is a carefully chosen word in those reports, and it raises questions no American official has been willing to answer publicly. If the United States knew that a close ally was operating a secret military installation on the territory of a third country without consent, and chose neither to inform that country nor to pressure the ally to withdraw, what exactly is America's responsibility for the Iraqi soldier who was killed? These are not abstract philosophical questions. They have direct implications for how every government on Earth evaluates American commitments to the international rules it claims to defend. The New York Times report, published on May 17, 2026, revealed the scope was even larger than initially understood. Israel had not built one secret base in Iraq. It had built two, using the same template across two separate conflicts. The first supported the June 2025 12-day war. The second, more elaborate and better resourced, supported the February 2026 campaign. This was not a desperate one-time emergency measure. It was a deliberate, repeatable, and refined operational template executed across multiple consecutive conflicts without once seeking the consent of the country whose territory was being used. Build the base, use the base, abandon the base, deny the base. And if denial eventually fails, absorb the diplomatic pressure and move forward, because by that point, the military objective has already been accomplished. The Israeli military has not officially confirmed the existence of either installation, and that sustained silence is itself a calculated strategic choice. For Iraq, the political consequences are profound and impossible to navigate cleanly. Iraq's government must constantly balance its deep economic and cultural ties with Iran on one side against its complex security relationship with the United States on the other. Condemning Israel loudly satisfies the Iraqi street and the Iranian-aligned factions that hold enormous institutional influence in Baghdad. But confronting Israel means confronting America, which remains structurally embedded in Iraqi security institutions, despite years of parliamentary pressure to withdraw American forces entirely. Iraq cannot simultaneously demand accountability for what Israel did and maintain the American relationships on which its own stability depends. That is an impossible equation, and everyone in Baghdad understands it with absolute clarity. The broader strategic message delivered by these secret bases will echo for years inside every defense ministry and intelligence agency across the Middle East and beyond. The message is fundamental and deeply destabilizing. Geography alone provides no protection. Legal sovereignty does not function as a shield when a more powerful military decides your territory is operationally useful. The fact that your country has declared itself neutral provides no guarantee that your land will not become a staging ground for a conflict you chose not to join. Syria learned a version of this lesson over a decade of Israeli strikes on its territory without consent or warning. Iraq has now learned it in a far more direct, damaging, and publicly documented form than Syria ever experienced. Jordan has been watching. Saudi Arabia has updated its threat assessments. Every government sharing a border with either Israel or Iran has now revised its strategic calculations based on what was revealed in the western Iraqi desert. There is one final element that the satellite imagery makes viscerally clear. The airstrip built in that dry lakebed was 1.6 kilometers of scraped earth cut into the floor of a sovereign nation that was not at war with anyone and had not agreed to host any foreign military operation. From that strip of remote desert, Israeli F-35 jets could reach targets deep inside Iran without the aerial refueling that would have exposed them to radar detection at the most dangerous moment of any mission. The engineering required to scrape that runway out of a dry lake was straightforward. The logistics behind covertly supplying and staffing it for months were anything but. The legal and moral implications of building it without permission, killing an Iraqi soldier to keep it secret, and denying its existence afterward are enormous, far-reaching, and entirely unresolved by any international institution. The question that now faces the international community is not whether this happened, because the satellite imagery and reporting from multiple credible organizations have conclusively answered that question. The question is what the world is actually prepared to do about a military precedent that, if left completely unchallenged, permanently rewrites the rules under which every sovereign nation on Earth once believed it was operating.